Welcome to Microcollege, a podcast exploring innovative, place-based, and humanly scaled responses to the crises in higher education, meaning, and discourse in our time. Everyone knows that colleges and universities are at a breaking point, but what can be done? I'm Jacob Hunt, the director of Thoreau College, a microcollege in Viroqua, Wisconsin. Join us each week as we tackle this question head-on. Welcome to Microcollege. Today, we are really thrilled to have a couple of guests from one of our closest peer microcolleges. In a lot of ways, it feels like our sibling school out there in the world. Started around the same time with a lot of similar inspirations and yet quite different locations and inspirations. I'm talking about Outer Coast, which is located in Sitka, Alaska. And today, our guests are Frank Eccher and Emily Drukman. Frank Eccher is the college launch lead at Outer Coast in Sitka, Alaska, where he is charting a course to accreditation for the launch of Outer Coast College in the fall of 2024. Originally from a small town in Colorado, he has written on trout conservation and wilderness narratives in the Mountain West, patterns of college attendance in rural America, among other topics. He plans to pursue doctoral study in the history of experimental colleges and the relationship between general education and American democracy. And Emily Drukman is currently a second-year architecture student at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana. She attended Outer Coast for the 2021-22 academic year program and returned to Sitka last summer as the dean's assistant working on Tlingit translation and editing. Thank you so much for joining us, Emily and Frank.
So glad to be here.
Yeah. Thank you.
So before we dig into your stories and to the wider story of Outer Coast, we are broadcasting, recording this on the 8th of November, and I wanted to mention that everyone listening out there, Thoreau College is, we are currently accepting applications for our spring semester program, which begins in January. The deadline for that application is November 15th. We're seeking a small cohort of just 6 participants for a semester-long deep dive into sustainable agriculture, expeditions, the arts, philosophy and literature here in Viroqua, Wisconsin. And I also know that Outer Coast is also accepting applications for your spring semester. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, and in the way that we are our sister schools, Jacob, we are also looking for students for our spring semester, and our deadline passed on November 1, but we are still accepting applications. If you are just hearing about us now, you can find the application online at outercoast.org. If you have any questions, you're free to reach out to me at frank@outercoast.org. So that similarly is a spring semester program. Students come to Sitka and take courses for college credit and engage in service to the Sitka community alongside self-governance responsibilities for their immediate student and student body community. So we'll talk more about all the things that Outer Coast is, but yeah, that spring semester deadline has passed, but you're still welcome to apply if you're interested.
Yeah, I should mention Thoreau College during the spring semester this year will also, for the first time, be able to offer college credit through a new partnership with the University of Illinois in Chicago, which we're super excited about. So if you're listening to a Microcollege podcast and you wondered, how do I get involved with one of these exciting things, you now have not only one, but 2 opportunities immediately. So go and apply to both of them and we'll fight it out.
Fantastic.
I think one of the things that should be mentioned, we here at Thoreau College and with the podcast and the Microcollege movement, we really are about a movement and about a constellation of similar inspirations. And I think both Outer Coast and Thoreau College have a similar. One of our roots are in Deep Springs. The director of Outer Coast was a classmate of mine at Deep Springs, Bryden Sweeney Taylor. And I think I liked it the way in a recent article, Bryden stated that Deep Springs for Outer Coast is the starting place, not the destination. And I think that's a term I might just steal because it's something similar here. Deep Springs is unique and inimitable in many ways, but a deep inspiration for what we're doing. And we're also inspired by other sources and by our location. But part of being a movement is we have had last year, one of our Metamorphosis year students was an Outer Coast alum, and now this fall, one of the Outer Coast students spent last year with us too. So we are exchanging students and I think and cross-pollinating ideas in ways that are really exciting to me.
Absolutely, I think among the many values we share, Jacob, is the idea that in the local is the global, and that in these really immersive, tight-knit context, you can sort of prepare yourself to be a member of so many different communities in the future. So I think you're spot on there.
Yeah, cool. So here on the podcast, we like to begin all of our conversations with people's biographies, and especially check in on where you were at this sort of early phase of your lives. And so, Frank, I mean, we read a little bit about your biography, but maybe you could think back a few years to when you were 18 years old. Where were you, 18 to 19 years old, and what were you doing? Where were you, and what was great about that time, and what was frustrating about that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up, as I mentioned, in a small town in Southwest Colorado. The son of two professional fly fishermen, actually. My parents ran a fly shop in Denver, Colorado for a long time. And I was very, very fortunate to get a nearly full financial aid offer to go to Yale for my undergraduate study. And have all sorts of complicated feelings about my time at Yale, I think particularly as an 18 and 19-year-old. Coming from the background that I did in small town Colorado, I had these really conflicting beliefs about what my education was for that would sort of tear themselves apart in my early undergraduate years. So I, in one sense, really believed in the value of a liberal education and a really expansive view of what that could mean. And so was in an intensive humanities program at Yale called Directed Studies, trying to sort of tease that out. But that experience in directed studies felt so heady and so divorced from my actual kind of lived reality in college, which was pretty fraught, not feeling like I had the tools to navigate the kind of social and cultural environment of a big city for the first time, let alone of such a like elite and inward-facing institution that Yale was for me in my undergrad years. So I had a hard time, and it took me a long time to kind of stumble my way into academic study that really felt fulfilling to me, and that was really rooted in place and landscape, and in the kind of higher order ideas of what a liberal education could be, which is what ultimately led me to Sitka. But at least at age 18, when I was really, really struggling, I would like go on the Deep Springs website and be like, what if I transferred? And then I never actually followed through. So.
Did you know about Deep Springs before you went to Yale, or is that something you encountered there?
I had heard of it. There was an alum of Deep Springs that I was put in contact with when I was applying to college, and it sounded interesting, but it sounded just too far off the path for me to seriously consider at that point. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So Emily, you're in the thick of things. You're in the age frame here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have a student's perspective. And you also can talk about a couple different ways of being engaged with the Microcollege project. But maybe take us back a couple of years now. Like how did you find yourself interested in Outer Coast, and what drew you to that?
Yeah. My background isn't one I share with many, so finding it in common with Frank and Sitka, I think, was really astounding. I also come from a very rural Southwest Montana town, excuse me, and my father was he was a graphite and bamboo fly rod engineer. But yeah, in terms of like finding education for myself, it sort of felt like a shapeless situation. There were all of these opportunities for sort of directing intelligence creatively, but it didn't really feel like there was sort of an outlet for where I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. And honestly, I had no idea what that was. I spent one very hapless semester at Westminster College in Salt Lake City, and then scurried back to Montana. And I've been studying architecture here ever since. And when I've been most recently calling it my sabbatical in Alaska, when I to Outer Coast, I was looking for education that didn't require so much consumptive effort on my part. I felt like I was sort of being put through a system in order to regurgitate a lot of information that I didn't necessarily understand, and taking the time in Alaska to actually slow down and to actually think about what my education meant to me and what it meant to the people around me, and figuring out ways to connect with people who were there for the same reasons and were there for very different reasons. I think, yeah, it was has transformed my life in so many different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. The small town background is certainly rare enough in American culture and in higher education. And I think I was lucky enough a few years ago to sit in on a focus group at Stanford, which was conducted by the university. It was essentially a focus group for Stanford students from rural places, which they defined as anywhere with fewer than 25,000 people, which was sort of funny to begin with. But there was a group of people who really, they identified each other as being, wow, we actually have shared experiences. They hadn't recognized each other as a group before that. It was fascinating to sit in on that as a person who really shared some of that experience myself growing up in a small town here in Wisconsin. So, yeah, Sitka, I think, one of the key things about these microcolleges, at least as my understanding of them, is they are place-based. They're located in specific places. They're in touch with that locality in a unique way. And so tell us a little bit about Sitka. What kind of a place is that?
Yeah, Sitka is I feel like the word that I used most often to describe Sitka when I first moved here was just magical. I felt like this real sense of reverence when I first moved to Sitka, and still feel that now. It's a small community of about 9,000 folks in Southeast Alaska. It is situated on the outer coast of Baranof Island, or She, as it's called in Tlingit. I think Sitka is so much of outer coast success is related to the community of Sitka and the ways in which, as a student at Outer Coast, you have these sort of concentric circles of community, and that like your student and staff community is sort of provides avenues with which to engage more deeply in the place around you. And rather than taking this sort of monastic approach of Deep Springs, or a kind of more isolated idea of what a microcollege could be, that really it's about learning how to develop longstanding and meaningful relationships with the community, and that we're thinking about that institutionally, but then also providing avenues for students to figure out how to navigate that themselves. And so I know Emily has a lot to share there too about kind of your personal journey in developing those relationships with the local community by way of Tlingit language and service and all the friendships that one can build here. So,
Emily, would you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think the first impression of Sitka is always sort of magical. It has the shortest runway in the U.S. For flights, and so no matter when you land, it's sort of abrupt, and then you're just there all of a sudden, and you're just on the Rocky Gutierrez tarmac, and you're just sort of surrounded by this incredible landscape and this bizarre community of people who are either there like very intentionally or have just sort of like ended up in Sitka. And I at least think for my first semester there, I think we had a harder time than my second semester. I think just because we didn't know how necessarily to break those concentric rings into like interactable pieces. I think we felt like that concentricity felt more insulated than anything. And then I think in the second semester, I think what we really experienced that was so transformative was getting to engage with the Tlingit language, and then in turn being able to engage with the land, because we then had these verbal reference for the place that we were. We were able to really place where we were in context with everything around us, and that concentricity became much more holding than any sort of insulative or suffocating feeling.
Yeah. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, just to say that I think the pandemic has made the project of kind of community relationships really, really challenging, and we were really lucky to be one of the few programs running something in person during the heart of the pandemic. But that also, I think, really, really hampered the kinds of relationships that students could build with the community. And Emily, was really there, kind of on the cusp of our like reopening to Sitka, and things have felt quite different since then.
Yeah, so my understanding of the origin story of Outer Coast, part of it is Deep Springs, but other part, it really comes from Sitka. So I've got a chance to meet Jonathan Christ-Tompkins, who's a local legislator there, my understanding is that the story starts with him in the sense of starting a college there. How would you tell that story?
Yeah, totally. Right. So half of that story, by way of Jonathan, is his real appreciation for Deep Springs and for the kinds of thinking that that Deep Springs kind of fosters and that he saw in his classmates at Yale, where he went for undergrad. The other half of that story really is Sitka and meeting a particular need in this community, which has everything to do with the Sheldon Jackson campus and the Sheldon Jackson campus has a really complex and difficult history. It has been an Alaska Native boarding school. It has also been a community college and then a four-year college most recently before it went bankrupt in 2007. And so it has both been a place of cultural genocide, but has also fostered the birth of the Alaska Native Brotherhood and Alaska Native Sisterhood, which was the first Native civil rights movement in the country, and has been this really incredible place to foster Indigenous thought so after it went bankrupt in 2007, Sitka really lost this community staple. It lost its college, and the campus just sort of sat dormant for 4 years, moldered in the rain for a long time until eventually it was sold or donated really to an organization called Alaska Arts Southeast, which then essentially took on the volunteer burden of restoring the campus to functionality and then actually being able to start using it for programming again. So the primary organization within Alaska Arts Southeast is the Sitka Fine Arts Camp. So the Sitka Fine Arts Camp has been around for a long time and has been housed on the Sheldon Jackson campus as well as the Mount Edgecombe High School campus here in Sitka. And they really led what some have called the largest volunteer effort in Alaska history, which I think is probably true, to take on the millions of dollars of deferred maintenance to bring the campus back into shape. And so, of course, this Sitka Fine Arts Camp is a summer program. And so when Jonathan was sort of first mulling over this idea, really the need was for academic year programming on campus to bring college students back here. So that was the vision. It was like there's the buildings and the campus and this real need in the Sitka community for that, the kind of vibrancy of a college community, and then this particular model at Deep Springs, which encouraged embodied practice and student agency and the real chance to kind of marry those two interests, and in particular to see the Sheldon Jackson campus as a place to foster Indigenous language and culture, and to kind of reclaim that in its history after so many tumultuous years and really harmful years. So that
commitment and engagement with Indigenous cultures and languages really stands out as part of the distinctive part of Uttercoast's presentation to the world, and I think that watching the development of the project there, it really is very impressive. So teaching of Indigenous languages is incorporated into the programs, and you're also, as I understand, doing this. You're offering several different languages through an online course. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, that's another good thing to advertise here is that today is actually the beginning of our Smallgyak MOOC, which is there are three major languages, Indigenous languages in Southeast: Smallgyak, Khatkil, and Tlingit. So today is the beginning of the Smallgyak MOOC, and then we'll be offering Tlingit and Khatkil later in the winter. And so you can find information about all of those MOOCs if you'd like to sign up. You don't have to have any background in the language to join and be a part of the community. So if you go to our website, you can learn more about those language classes and sign up.
And if you want to make a pitch to someone, like, why would they do that? Like, what is a language that's a very small population base? Like, why dive into one of these Indigenous languages?
Yeah, that might be a good question for you, Emily.
I think, at least for myself, I think having a chance to approach language with such a high degree of intentionality is I think, just so opening and welcoming to notions of community that I feel like are otherwise more difficult to approach. I think having a really directed response towards something that's happening in the world, and towards these like highly endangered languages, and taking a chance to make it playful and make it fun and make it a thing to learn about, to make these languages as alive as they are, and make that clear to the world. I think it's just such an important thing to be a part of, and I think I feel like it's such a good practice in openness, just coming at it and having no background and not having a whole lot of context, and just being willing to play in the space with everybody else who's so dedicated to the thing.
Yeah, it's impressive to me. I mean, an important text for us here at Thoreau College has been Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, who's writing out of the Potawatomi, and speaking also about different indigenous traditions. And she speaks so movingly about language and about what is contained in knowledge about a place, or about the plants and animals of a place in the language, not only the vocabulary but in the grammar and so forth of a language. That if we only have a handful of languages being used in the world, we've lost a lot of knowledge. Actually, we've lost a lot of ways and tools of thinking about things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. If you attend some of these classes, you can learn about the endless complexities of the Tlingit verb structure, which as soon as anybody goes to tell you anything about it, they'll say, you're not going to understand any of this, and then they'll try to sort of pick apart the many, many complex features of the verb. And it adds these layers and layers of meaning, and really like lenses with which to understand the world. And so I think that is a huge benefit. And also, like Emily was alluding to, you can't learn the Tlingit language by sitting down with a book and just like poring over it. It requires a kind of community engagement and a kind of openness, and respect for elders and culture bearers. And it is it's a way of kind of entering into the exchanging of gifts and the rich kind of tradition that is a part of learning the language.
And how have you gone about bringing that, both the language and other aspects of indigenous culture into your courses and curriculum? And do you have local partner organizations or particular tribal groups? How does that work?
Yeah, so this has probably been the most distinct shift in our kind of mission and academic programming over the past year. Has been that we hired our first academic dean, his name is Matthew Spellberg, and Matthew has his PhD in comparative literature, but is really focused on indigenous languages and culture, and has been a student of Tlingit for 5+ years now, and has spent a lot of time in Southeast Alaska, and has been like a real model for students and for us as faculty about sort of how to engage in how to be a respectful learner and how to bring others into that learning process. And so through his work and his relationships with the local tribe and communities throughout Southeast, different indigenous language scholars and culture bearers, we've really put indigenous studies at the center of the academic curriculum. So literally everybody at Outer Coast takes an indigenous studies course. And that meets 5 times throughout the week. 1 day is focused on Tlingit language. 2 days are focused on works of indigenous oral literature. And so you sit down and read them as you would, reading the Odyssey in a typical core curriculum class. You are reading oral literature and analyzing and thinking about kind of how the language itself unlocks these worlds of meanings that we're describing. And then the students meet once a week with Yedi Kuk Ah, who is a longtime teacher in Sitka of language and dance, who speaks more on the kind of history and political history of Alaska Native groups. And then lastly, students engage in storytelling of their own. So they actually once a week different students will have to deliver 6 to 8 minutes of oratory on different subjects related to place or culture or communication itself to kind of synthesize everything else that's happening into an actual kind of narrative that they're giving to the community. And students tell stories, staff also tell stories, it's been really incredible to watch that kind of curriculum develop. So this is our first version of this semester, really, and we're excited to see how that grows from here.
Thoreau College is a leader in an emergent movement dedicated to the renewal and revitalization of higher education through the creation of new, humanly scaled institutions with holistic curricula known as microcolleges. Thoreau College, higher education for the whole human being.
You've talked a bit about the MOOC course with the 3 different native languages. And yeah, maybe you could talk about the evolution of the programming. Like Thoreau College, Outer Coast has come into existence during this crazy period of the pandemic and in the landscape of a lot of change and disruption in higher education, building things as we figure them out and trial and error. So we here we've done 3-week summer programs. We've done semester programs, we've done year-long programs, we've done things that are essentially classes that meet once or twice a week with local members of the community. Can you talk about some of the things that you've done and also where you're headed next in terms of what is your kind of ultimate kind of design goals as for programming?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll probably talk most about the academic pillar, but can maybe get into some other aspects of the program too. But so we started, initially the vision was to open a 2-year college right off the bat. Jonathan and a group of collaborators sat down and wrote this amazing, fantastical document called the Outer Coast College Blueprint, which is fun to read. It talks about the glaciology program and raising ducks and other things like that maybe we'll get the chance to come back to in the opening of the college. But after some time, the team felt that it would make more sense strategically to start with smaller programs, to develop administrative structures and a sense of the curriculum, and then to work stepwise towards longer and longer programs. I think, somewhat similar to what you all have done at Thoreau. So we began with a summer seminar in 2018, which we ran in 2018 and 2019, went virtual in 2020, and then opened the Outer Coast Year program in the fall of 2020. And so are now running basically these 2 programs, the Outer Coast Year program in the fall and spring and the summer seminar in the summer. And academically, the pitch originally was sort of, we just want to host the most kind of neuron bending, exciting courses that we can at Outer Coast. And it's really like we'll bring anybody here that we feel like is excited about the mission and has a course proposal that we're excited about. And so it was kind of big open calls for proposals, and it was sort of the best proposal wins in our thinking of the summer seminar. And then slowly we've been moving more and more towards trying to fit a particular kind of curricular framework, kind of guided by some of the core collaborators we built, or collaboration relationships we built with different faculty we've had, and things like that. So, in the present moment, I think we really are understanding the summer seminar as, still just as expansively, but I think with a particular focus on like why college. So the summer seminar is for rising high school juniors and seniors. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And they're many of them are preparing to navigate the college admissions process, and the hope is to both provide them the tools to find, match, and fit colleges that are going to be right for them, but also to encourage this kind of more fundamental question about like, what is college for? And no matter where I go, how can I make the most of that experience? And so I think that's really become a big hallmark of the summer. And for the year is really sort of has been kind of the proving ground for the college in terms of building these core curricular components around Indigenous studies, but also finding STEM faculty and thinking about what STEM education looks like in the context of Outer Coast with our proximity to the lands and waters of Sitka and all of the amazing research going on at the Science Center and Sitka Sound Science Center and places like that. So in this moment, we are really tinkering towards the 2-year curriculum. And so that involves hiring a core slate of faculty, which is sort of built around our dean, Matthew Spellberg, and then in hiring those faculty, thinking about sort of the disciplinary balance of those core faculty, and then kind of fleshing out the associate's degree from there. So those are the conversations that we're having right now, and we're really lucky to have had such an amazing slate of faculty alums that are helping us to think about what that will look like.
So right now, the timeline is, as I understand it, to start to have admissions for a 2-year cohort starting in 2024?
Yeah, exactly. So right now we're navigating this process called substantive change, by which we would become a branch campus of an existing institution, University of Alaska Southeast, which would allow us to open our doors as a 2-year college in fall of 2024 under the auspices of UAS, and then to actually move towards independent accreditation after that. But for anyone interested in coming to Outer Coast, yes, you're the first term that you could enter would be fall of 2024, and we hope to be able to actually open that application in early 2024, if not earlier than that. But yeah.
And what at that point is your target size? How many students would you hope to have at that moment?
Yeah, so the target size is 15 to 20 students per year for with 2-year cohorts. So 15 to 20 incoming first years, and then another 15 to 20 in the year after that, for a total size of 30 to 40, which seems to be sort of the steady state for a lot of these microcollege institutions. Yeah, that just feels appropriate for kind of the project and how we imagine the community operating. So, yeah.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, congratulations. That's really exciting progress to follow. We're really rooting for all of our peers out there. So, yeah, so you mentioned the 3 pillars there, and this is something that is part of the Deep Springs heritage. And I wondered, we've talked with Sue Darlington a few months back, who's the president of Deep Springs, and here at Thoreau, we've kind of evolved into a 5-pillar description of what we're doing. But I wonder if you could take a moment to describe those pieces. You've talked a bit about the academic component, but the other 2 are self-governance and then labor and service in your formulation. Can you talk about those 2? And maybe, Emily, maybe you could start by talking about the self-governance component, having participated in it.
Yeah, during the year program, the self-governance aspect of the experience is a lot of just figuring out how to get people in the right spaces at the right time. And a lot of that is just committing to really figuring out how people meet one another and figuring out how to actually run meetings. And, I came in for, the second year that Outer Coast had been running a year program. There's not a lot of blueprint, and it's basically just figuring out how to get people heard and come up with creative solutions sort of like on the fly. And a lot of that just looks like, that's very similar to from what I understand of the Deep Springs model of just having frequent student body meetings, figuring out chores, allotting out responsibilities, and then figuring out schedules for everybody. And in particular, during my time, part of self-governance is figuring out how to get everybody in the same place while everybody had individual schedules. And I also sat as the student co-chair of the curriculum committee. And so that eventually, participation and stuff like that as a student eventually leads into things like figuring out what the best schedule for Outer Coast is, or asking questions like, what is the ideal Outer Coast student, and what does the schedule for that look like? Like, what do we want to actually be doing?
And what did you find valuable about this experience, and is it something you carry with you today?
Oh, absolutely. I think I'm much more pro-conflict now. I think we really learned that you just cannot step on people's toes gently. when you're trying to get things done in a very crunch time frame. And I just learning how to approach people in the moment and not have to go consult with 5 other people in order to get things done. And I think now what I'm realizing is that the people that I was surrounded with were just like this. People end up at alternative education models because, they're usually creative and thinking in unique ways. And I was surrounded by people who were thinking in creative ways about how to meet people and how to make community. And that's something I'm especially missing now. I don't doubt that they're around me. I just have fewer structures to do it. And in some ways, the flexibility of Outer Coast was really nice for learning those skills and sort of honing ways to interact with other people in productive and sometimes intentionally unproductive ways.
Back at a mainstream institution there, do you find yourself stepping into leadership positions more often than you would have before, do you think? Or, picking up kind of those roles?
Not necessarily. I feel much more comfortable sort of going out alone on things. I feel much more comfortable sort of going with my gut on things. I'm in much larger classes, so ironically, there aren't a lot of leadership opportunities that I felt in the classroom. But on my own, I felt much more flexible when it comes to pursuing my interests. I feel like I don't need someone to host my interest in order for it to happen. I've become a huge fan of flyers and just putting out events that I want to happen. I did like a clothing swap the other week. I did an impromptu soup club, and I don't think I could have done any of that without like all of the people that were in my cohort with me together.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, an initiator, a social entrepreneur. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a quality that I observe in our alums and certainly Deep Springers, and I think that ability to go out on a limb, whether it's in a group or on your own, is certainly it's one of the outcomes that I appreciate out of this type of education.
Yeah, and I think one of the unique challenges and opportunities of the Outer Coast Year program is just that there are no second years, and in many ways, this faculty sort of has to act as the second years in terms of passing traditions from one cohort to the next. And so I think this can feel intimidating for new students walking in the fall. It's just like it can feel like a blank slate because there isn't someone there kind of walking you through like this is how to be a member of the student body. And so that's something that we're trying to think about in this next iteration of the year program, but also it provides this just like amazing vista for folks like you, Emily, and your cohort mates to just like make things up, and the kind of vibrance of a lot of that creativity as well. So I know that that's a hard thing to do, but really amazing when it works.
Yeah, and it's I think it was a really amazing transition to see. I had the opportunity of being there for the full year and the summer, and seeing the way self-governance operates among like a younger student body, and especially as somebody who was there. I wasn't originally supposed to be working much with the students, but I sort of ended up spending a lot of time just with them, talking about like how hard SB meetings were, and in particular we swam a lot in the ocean, and I think it was really amazing just realizing I would say things and then I would realize how quickly they would turn into reality, and I sort of had to reconcile with like, okay, like the things I say, these people are taking very seriously. Like I need to know what to say in these moments. And it was, but getting to see like very small moments that I didn't think much of come into moments like storytelling or just, someone who hadn't swam all summer finally being able to jump into the water. Just, it's really amazing to see, during the year, I think it could be a longer process and it's sort of a different kind of investment. And in the summer, it was just so much energy. It was really incredible to see.
Yeah, it sounds like you got a little bit of a second year experience just in the summer there as well, and certainly from Deep Springs, that's a really important part of the cycle, right? To be the person who welcomes the new group, who passes on the traditions, who teaches the basic skills, and and then has a chance to reevaluate them too, is certainly part of the learning. That's kind of praxis, iterative process of learning something in the field. So
yeah, we're trying to figure out a way to adopt an OC cowboy.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So that points to the labor and service pillar. What does that look like at Outer Coast?
Yeah. So at Outer Coast, right. So rather than a labor pillar, the pillar is both service and labor, and so it's difficult to kind of splice like what counts as service, what counts as labor. But in general, it involves sort of our responsibilities to each other and responsibilities to the community of Sitka. And so in the year program in particular, that involves essentially students going out and forming relationships, service relationships with different community partners. And some of those are a little bit sort of prefigured by staff because of the kinds of relationships that we're helping to pass on from year to year. So we consistently have students volunteering down at the Sitka Sound Science Center or with KCAW Raven Radio, which is very near and dear to my heart. But there are all sorts of other opportunities that come up that sort of, I think, bridge service with what's happening in the classroom and sort of the community's whole sense of itself. And so a particular example there that I want to name is this amazing, amazing conference called Sharing Our Knowledge, which happens every 2 years in different communities in Southeast Alaska. It's also just called the Clan Conference, and it's this convening of Indigenous cultures and scholars. It's like vaguely like an academic conference, but so different in so many ways. And so this year we had the real privilege of being able to be the main volunteer organization supporting Sharing Our Knowledge in Wrangell, which is a even smaller community here in Southeast Alaska. And we all got to fly to Wrangell together, students and faculty, and got to basically help to put on this conference and, get food for elders and man the doors and do language learning, Tlingit language learning in the local schools in Wrangell. And it was just this kind of amazing, the whole Outer Coast community was moving together and moving among all the amazing people we got to meet in Wrangell. And so I feel like that has sort of unlocked a really bigger idea of what service can mean at Outer Coast, not, checking off a certain number of hours every week because you're supposed to as like a programmatic component, but like actually understanding that as essential to your relationships to each other and to the communities that we're a part of. So, we've mentioned this before, but I feel like Tlingit language unlocked all of that. And we've really seen that come to fruition in the past couple of months.
Cool. Emily, is there something that stands out from the service or labor components of your time there?
Yeah, personally, I struggled a little bit with like picking up a service relationship. I think I struggle so much with time management, and I really was thinking about service and labor in this very traditional way of like, okay, I need to show up at this time and be reliable and be invested in it, and simultaneously, you're not, you don't have a lot of external motivators. And I do think that language learning really unlocked that. To drop another name, the Tlingit Language Conference of the past spring, we first got to host, when we got to host these elders in the spring, we prepared herring eggs, gah, and we had been gifted several boughs of hemlock, which had herring eggs laid on them, but we didn't know that they had moss in them. And what that meant is that before they could be, of course, gifted or eaten, they had to be gone through individually, and the strands of moss had to be picked out completely, and there's like seaweed all mixed in. And for a good portion of it, we did it on the docks, in cold sea wind before we thought to ever move it inside. But I just remember at one moment, someone came up while we were on the docks and said, "Oh, you don't really have to pick through these that much. If there's seaweed or whatever, you could probably just throw them over the docks." And then everybody's chests sort of puffed up and everybody's heads got a little higher, and we talking about potentially going home soon. Everyone was complaining about their fingers getting cold, and we were there for another like 6 hours after that or something ridiculous. Just everybody was so intent on hosting, and there is that degree of selflessness, but also like a great involvement of personal investment into a project. I don't even know how to explain it, but we basically just got to have a bunch of Tlingit elders come and visit in Sitka, and they just brought this incredible gift-giving spirit with them. And before they even arrived, everybody was just so possessed by this idea of like being good hosts. And I watched everybody, like, I think it is very normal and healthy to like gripe and moan about having to do service or labor or preparation for hosting, and nobody was saying a word. Everybody was just so excited. And I think when you finally get to a point where you're not thinking about it cumulatively, you're not thinking about sort of hours completed or what exactly it is you're working towards. You're just sort of in movement with people, is I think a really amazing moment.
Microcollege is recorded in the broadcast studios of WDRT Viroqua 91.9 FM Driftless Community Radio on Main Street in Viroqua, Wisconsin. Thanks to Jim and all the folks at WDRT for the support of Thoreau College and the Microcollege podcast.
I wanted to ask you about so in doing this podcast and looking at institutions, organizations, projects that we see as related or peers, started to develop kind of a definition of microcolleges, as I understand it, as Thoreau College is using this term, and we touched on most of these elements already. Basically, there's four kind of key elements that I'm identifying. One is these institutions tend to be place-based, right? They have a strong connection to a particular place and its history and its ecology. Obviously, Outer Coast has this very strong part of its identity. It is humanly scaled, so micro scale, right? And obviously has embodied this there as well. It has a curriculum which is holistic. It is a curriculum for the whole human being. It's not just academics. It also involves community, self-governance, involves engagement through labor or service in some way with the world. And then I guess the fourth pillar, as I'm still looking for the right term for it, but maybe you can help with this, but it is, I would say, it contains, the term I'm using right now is meaning-centered, right? It is in some ways connected with, you could say, spirituality, meaning, purpose, kind of inner development of the students. And I think one of the things that if you go to your website, Outer Coast, right away, one of the biggest words there is virtue can be inspired. And so virtue is a rich word, a lot of history. And so when you use that term, virtue can be inspired, what do you mean by virtue in that context? And what is that assertion? What do you understand? What do you mean by that when you say that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is something that we hope to be sort of in conversation about all the time in developing Outer Coast. And so, I guess this isn't to dodge the question of virtue, but just to focus on the question of meaning first, which I think is something that I think is spot on, is that I think what we were trying to do is to give people the tools to make meaning of the world and to give people essentially multiple traditions, multiple ways of thinking with which to then make meaning in different ways and then kind of compare those different ways of understanding the world. To do that by, reading a work of Tlingit oral literature, but also reading, works of the Western canon and being able to understand those traditions as in conversation with each other in a meaningful way. And so I think that I think is one half of what we're trying to do, the kind of building meaning through critical and creative thinking. And then the other half, I think, gets to the virtuous change aspect that you're describing, Jacob, which is sort of taking those models of understanding the world and using them to actually then reshape the world as for the better. And so being able to actually communicate that meaning, those worlds of meaning to others, and be able to collaborate with others in actually reshaping the world for the better. And so the idea of kind of what we imagine an Outer Coast student as being able to do is is not necessarily to always be the leader or always be the one on the stage, but to be someone who can walk into a room and assess what's going on and sort of be able to then do something to make that place better, or to sort of help others to reach a shared goal. And so that particular idea of virtue in itself, I think, will shift and grow, but I think that idea that students are able to affect change both in their own lives and in their sense of themselves, but then also in the world, I think is really core to what we're trying to do. And I think just as an epilogue to that point is I think that at Outer Coast, we understand sort of that sort of internal sense of agency and the external sense of the ability to affect change as in dialogue with each other, and that you don't develop the self so that you can then go change the world, but that you actually are already have obligations to others and the world, and that in learning how to meet those with care and respect, that you are then in turn developing yourself as well. So I think that's core to what we're trying to do.
Yeah, a virtuous loop, you might say, a virtuous feedback cycle between the world and the self. Yeah, beautiful. Service can take so many different forms, and I think for me, like the engagement with the concrete, like the material of the world. So those herring eggs and the moss and the sea, like that's a piece that is definitely missing at most campuses, right? That is distinctive of this holistic kind of Deep Springs inspired, and just the holistic education that we're both engaged in. So. I think we're coming close to the end of our hour here. And I guess my last question is, and I know that you're thinking a lot about this as we are right now, is who is this education for? When you imagine your like future students, those 15 or 20 people who come and be there in the fall of 2024, who are they? Where are they coming from? And what's motivating? Why are they choosing to do this as opposed to anything else they could be doing with their time and their education?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, I think the most incredible thing about getting to meet the folks that I did at my cohort is the shared openness of everybody in attendance. I think people just had an orientation towards creativity in this way, that people were willing to be part of whatever environment they were in. And I think that's the most exciting thing about Outer Coast and about the folks who end up being there.
I think the ideal Outer Coast student is someone who is relentlessly curious about the world and their place in it, and that can take a lot of different forms, but that they sort of understand their own education as sort of an orientation to the world, and not just to a set of facts to memorize or a kind of particular professional goal to aim for, but to understand kind of the heart of a liberal education, particularly in the transition from high school into whatever comes next, as this real opportunity to engage with some of the real fundamental questions of meaning making that are important, not just to develop a career, but to develop as a person, as a human being. And so that's like the biggest picture view of it. But on a more kind of specific institutional view, we really want Outer Coast to be accessible first to Alaskans and to students from rural Alaska and Alaska Native students for whom we really want their perspectives at the table, and want those students to not feel like they have to kind of check that identity at the door in pursuing higher education, and to be able to provide pathways to higher education, both to attend other institutions of higher education, but also to persist and succeed at those institutions. But that we want to be open and available to students from all sorts of different backgrounds. And so our target has always been to have half of the cohort at least be from Alaska, but to accept students from everywhere. Anybody who kind of is aligned with some of those values and curiosities about the world and their place in it.
Yeah. Part of that accessibility clearly is financial, and maybe you could just say a little bit of how you've approached that there at Outer Coast. How does finances work from a student perspective?
Yeah, so our primary goal has always been to make the cost of attendance process as human as possible. I think in line with all of the other aspects of a holistic education. And so when students apply to Outer Coast, their admissions process is entirely need blind. And then upon admission, we really see the cost of attendance process as sort of a family or kinship affair, trying to bring in students and their families into this process of financing their Outer Coast education, and ultimately we meet full financial need for all students through substantial scholarships and grants, and then we're able to do that because of the generous philanthropic support that allows us to support students in paying their way for Outer Coast. So. And so we really do mean that cost is not a barrier for any student to attend Outer Coast, either for the summer seminar or for the year, and that actual cost is figured out in conversation with our staff and students and their families.
Yeah, it's certainly that's emerged also as an important commonality for many of these microcollege projects, and certainly very similar to the way we've operated here too. And it's a big commitment for an organization. It's a leap in the dark to say, yes, we will make it possible for you to come and somehow or some way. And I think that but I do think it's a core part of our mission, and it seems like you've really dived into that deeply as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time and for your work. And it's really great to know that you're out there. And so good luck with your plans for the future, for the spring and beyond. Thank you for spending some time with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacob. Good luck to you all too, and I'm hopeful that we can convene in person before too long.
Absolutely. Amen. All right. Have a good day.
Thank you.